In a world obsessed with celebrity smiles and red carpet perfection, few faces shine brighter or feel more haunted than that of Keanu Reeves. To millions, he's the invincible Neo, the relentless John Wick, the quiet warrior who turns bullets into ballet and pain into power. But behind that disarming smile, behind the meme-worthy moments of subway rides and unexpected generosity, lies a life story etched with more scars than scripts. While the media painted him as the nicest guy, in Hollywood, the truth was far more gut-wrenching. Keanu's kindness wasn't born from peace, it was forged in pain. From the moment he first appeared on screen, something in his eyes betrayed the battles he never spoke about. Those eyes, soft and distant, carried a sorrow that couldn't be rehearsed, a vacancy that hinted at a grief deeper than the characters he portrayed. Audiences called him mysterious, elusive, even emotionless at times. But they didn't realize that the mystery wasn't an act. It was armor. Every role he took on, every blockbuster hit, wasn't just a performance. It was a sanctuary, a place to pour the ache of a life riddled with abandonment, heartbreak, and unimaginable loss. While other celebrities built empires on controversy or attention-seeking, Keanu built his legacy on silence, dignity, and survival. He never begged for sympathy. He never explained the sadness behind his eyes. He simply kept showing up, project after project, year after year, even as life tried to break him time and time again. And now, at 60, as the world continues to celebrate him as a beloved cultural icon, few realize that the path behind him is paved not with red carpets, but with shattered dreams, buried loved ones, and the unbearable weight of everything he's lost. This is not the story of Hollywood's nicest guy. This is the story of the man who stared into the abyss and somehow came back with a smile. Long before the fame, before the fight scenes and slow-motion stardom, Keanu Reeves was just a boy caught in a storm he couldn't escape. Born in Beirut, Lebanon, in 1964, Keanu's life began with poetry, his name meaning cool breeze over the mountains. But any hope of peace would vanish quickly. His father, a Hawaiian geologist with Chinese, Portuguese, and English ancestry, vanished from Keanu's life when he was just 2 years old, leaving behind a silence that would become a recurring character in his story. By the time Keanu turned 13, he had seen his father for the last time, a farewell without hugs, without closure, without a single comforting word. That absence wasn't just emotional, it was structural. His family fractured like glass under pressure. His mother, Patricia, a costume designer from England, chased stability through a carousel of marriages, dragging Keanu and his siblings from Beirut to Sydney to New York, and finally to Toronto. With every move came a new stepfather who never stayed, a new school that never fit, a new address that never felt like home. Keanu's life became a blur of unfamiliar walls, half-packed suitcases, and birthdays celebrated in cities that never stayed long enough to be remembered. Amid the chaos, only one person remained constant: Kim, his younger sister. Half-siblings came and went, but Kim shared both parents and all the pain. For Keanu, she wasn't just family. She was proof that something could last. Still, the emotional weight was crushing. School became a war zone. Over 5 years, Keanu cycled through 4 high schools. He struggled with dyslexia, watching words swim off pages while teachers dismissed him as defiant. One principal even expelled him just for asking too many questions. But he wasn't rebellious. He was searching for meaning in a world that never offered any. The only place he found it was on the ice. As a hockey goalie, they called him the Wall, a boy who could stop anything flying at him, even if he couldn't stop the storms inside. He dreamed of the Olympics, of wearing Canada's colors, of being unbreakable. But just as hope took root, an injury at age 15 shattered everything. Hockey was gone. Home had never been there. and school had failed him. Before he was even old enough to vote, Keanu Reeves had already experienced more abandonment, loss, and brokenness than many face in a lifetime. But that wasn't the end of his suffering. It was only the beginning. If Keanu Reeves ever seemed distant in interviews or quiet in crowds, it's because he grew up learning to exist on the outside. Diagnosed with dyslexia as a child, every classroom became a minefield where the letters refused to stay still, and the world moved too fast for his mind to catch up. Teachers mistook his struggle for rebellion. He wasn't lazy, he was overwhelmed. His questions weren't defiance, they were desperation. But school systems don't make space for nuance, and by his teenage years, Keanu had been labeled a problem student, cycling through 4 high schools in 5 years, each one pushing him closer to the edge of isolation. One principal expelled him outright just for being too inquisitive. To the world, he was difficult. But deep down, Keanu was just a boy trying to understand a world that constantly failed to understand him. In the middle of that chaos, he found a fleeting sense of identity on the ice. Hockey, of all things, became his first refuge. Behind the thick padding and mask, he wasn't the misunderstood kid anymore. He was the Wall, a goalkeeper, with lightning-fast reflexes and the grit to protect his team. On the rink, there were no reading tests, no lectures, no judgment, only focus, adrenaline, and the satisfaction of stopping something cold in its tracks. He dreamed of going pro, of joining the Ontario Hockey League, maybe even reaching the Olympics. For once, he felt like he had a path. But just as that dream began to take shape, it was ripped away. At 15, a devastating injury shattered his shot at a future in the sport. The one thing that had made him feel unbreakable was gone in an instant. And so, for the second time before adulthood, Keanu watched his world collapse. First his family, now his purpose. The ice rink had been his only sanctuary, the one place he could transform his pain into power. But fate had other plans. Stripped of home, direction, and now identity, Keanu entered his later teen years with nothing but trauma in his rear view and uncertainty on the road ahead. And yet, even as life kept closing doors, something else quietly waited for him just out of frame. A new stage, a different script, and a role that would require every ounce of pain he had ever carried. When hockey slipped through his fingers, Keanu Reeves didn't fall apart. He fell forward. The ice had betrayed him, school had rejected him, and family had scattered like ash in the wind. But instead of crumbling, he took a detour into something even more unpredictable: acting. It wasn't glamour that pulled him, it was survival. Acting didn't demand perfect reading skills or academic accolades. It demanded something he had in abundance: raw emotion and lived-in pain. In his earliest days, Keanu scraped by with small TV roles and commercials in Canada. He downed soda in a Coca-Cola ad with all the hunger of a kid who knew what an empty cupboard looked like. He hosted a children's show, awkward but magnetic, letting his gentle weirdness shine just enough to capture attention. These weren't the glamorous beginnings of a Hollywood legend. They were jobs for a teenager who had already made resilience his default setting. With a tattered suitcase, a busted Volvo, and a name casting agents couldn't pronounce, Keanu drove to Los Angeles, not with swagger, but with desperate hope. His first years in Hollywood were brutal. He rented tiny apartments with paper-thin walls and stretched his paychecks until they cried for mercy. Casting directors looked at his soulful eyes and soft voice and couldn't decide if he was leading man, material, or just another artistic drifter. But where others burned out, Keanu endured. He wasn't trying to be famous. He was trying to survive. When the indie drama River's Edge gave him a chance to show the shadows inside him, something changed. Critics began whispering, "This guy might be more than meets the eye." Permanent record followed, and again, grief poured from him so authentically that audiences started to wonder what pain he'd lived through. These roles weren't acted. They were lived. Every frame was a mirror of the storms he had weathered, and in this fragile rise, he found something he'd never had before: a calling. Acting wasn't just a profession, it was therapy. It was escape. It was the one place he could bleed safely, with the lights on and the camera rolling. When he later said, "Grief changes shape, but never ends," he wasn't quoting a philosophy. He was describing the fuel that had kept him going when the world offered nothing but locked doors. The boy who had once been expelled for asking too many questions was now answering them, not with words but with performances that whispered everything he'd never said aloud. As Keanu's star began to flicker in the late 80s and early 90s, it seemed like Hollywood couldn't decide what to do with him. On one hand, critics praised his raw vulnerability in dramas like River's Edge and Permanent Record, where grief clung to his voice like an invisible co-star. But just as audiences began to see him as a serious actor, fate threw him into a role that would change everything, and not necessarily for the better. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure became a cultural phenomenon, catapulting Keanu to mainstream fame with his now iconic portrayal of the airheaded, time-traveling teen Ted Theodore Logan. The film was a hit, fans loved him, and Hollywood took notice, but not in the way Keanu had hoped. Almost overnight, the industry slapped a label on him: the dumb but lovable guy. Directors who had once seen potential in his depth now dismissed him as a one-note fluke. The irony? He took the role because he wanted something lighthearted, a reprieve from the emotional intensity that had come to define his work. But the label stuck like superglue. "I craved something lighthearted," Keanu later admitted, "but that label stayed with me for years." Suddenly, casting agents stopped offering him layered characters. Scripts for dark dramas vanished. In their place came comedy sidekicks, teen movies, and cartoonish caricatures of what they thought he was. To the world, he was just whoa and dude. To Keanu, it was a creative prison. He had bared his soul to audiences, only to be told he was too vacant, too limited, too wooden. The sting cut deep. He had poured his real-life grief into on-screen roles, and in return, the press mocked his voice, his mannerisms, even his name. But instead of lashing out or reinventing himself in desperation, Keanu did what he always did. He endured. He kept showing up, taking small roles in indie films, turning down projects that felt fake, and biding his time. Behind the scenes, he remained heartbreakingly aware that Hollywood saw him as less than what he was. But rather than argue, he let his silence speak louder than criticism. He let his work, flawed or praised, tell the truth. Because for Keanu, the real battle wasn't just on the screen. It was proving, quietly and painfully, that a man carved by trauma could still hold more depth than the world dared to believe. The emotional weight Keanu Reeves brought to the screen wasn't the product of training or method. It was pain, unfiltered. Behind the quiet stares and soft-spoken lines was a man already acquainted with grief, far deeper than any character he portrayed. When My Own Private Idaho hit theaters in 1991, critics raved about his unexpected depth. But they had no idea they were watching a man echoing his own heartbreak. In that film, Keanu starred alongside River Phoenix, the brilliant and troubled actor who would become more than just a co-star. He became Keanu's soul brother. Their bond was immediate, unspoken, and forged in a mutual understanding of fragility and artistic longing. In River, Keanu found someone who mirrored his emotional intensity, his loneliness, and his quiet refusal to play by Hollywood's superficial rules. They didn't need cameras to act close, they simply were. Together they shared a kind of spiritual refuge in an industry built on masks. But Hollywood, as always, had other plans. While their careers ascended, River's personal demons deepened. And in 1993, just 2 years after Idaho cemented their legacy as one of the most emotionally raw duos in indie cinema, River Phoenix died of a drug-related episode outside the Viper Room. The loss hit Keanu like a sledgehammer, one of the only people who truly understood him. Gone, just like that. No warning, no closure. The world saw headlines. Keanu saw a part of himself ripped away. And once again, he didn't scream. He didn't cry on camera. He receded into himself, the same way he had when his father vanished, when his hockey dream collapsed, when school tossed him aside. But the grief didn't disappear. It soaked into every performance that followed. From the heavy silences of Little Buddha to the tortured grief in The Devil's Advocate, audiences felt something they couldn't explain. They called it gravitas. They called it soul. But what they were really seeing was a man carrying death like an invisible backpack, present in every glance, every sigh, every unspoken pause. River's death didn't just affect Keanu emotionally, it became part of his creative DNA. In that sorrow, he found something tragic and terrifying. The realization that no one, no matter how bright their spirit, is safe from the darkness. And instead of running from it, Keanu brought it to set. He made grief his co-star, and gave the world performances it would never forget. When The Matrix exploded onto screens in 1999, it redefined cinema, pop culture, and Keanu Reeves all at once. But what audiences didn't see behind the slow-motion bullets and philosophical code was the brutal toll it took on the man who became Neo. For most, it was just a sci-fi masterpiece. For Keanu, it was a war he fought with his own body. While the world watched him dodge bullets in gravity-defying choreography, few knew that behind the cameras, Keanu was pushing through excruciating physical agony. Before filming even began, he was diagnosed with a serious spinal injury that compressed his nerves and risked paralysis. Yet instead of stepping back, he strapped on a neck brace and dove into months of grueling martial arts training. His joints screamed. His muscles tore. Every wire stunt twisted his body like a puppet, and still he kept going. Why? Because for Keanu, pain was nothing new. He'd lived it. He'd buried it. And now he was channeling it into a character who symbolized transformation through suffering. Neo wasn't just a role. It was a reflection. The man who had spent a lifetime waking up from emotional nightmares was now tasked with awakening humanity in fiction. The weight wasn't just cinematic, it was personal. And yet, even after The Matrix shattered box office records and rewrote action movie history, the praise that followed was tainted with the same doubts that had haunted Keanu for years. Critics still called him wooden, limited, lucky. The headlines couldn't reconcile how someone so soft-spoken and awkward off-screen could carry a billion-dollar franchise. But Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't clap back. Instead, he let the bruises speak. Let the neck braces, torn ligaments, and sleepless nights prove his commitment. Because unlike many stars whose fame comes with applause and privilege, Keanu earned every inch of his ascent through blood, sweat, and silent resilience. Neo was never just a hacker-turned-hero. He was the avatar of a man who had been told his whole life that he wasn't enough. Too slow, too sad, too strange, and who, against all odds, rewrote the rules of the system. Off-screen, Keanu was bending himself into agony. On-screen, he bent reality. And when the credits rolled, the pain didn't stop. It just became part of the legend. By the time Keanu Reeves returned to the spotlight in 2014 as John Wick, the world had changed. But the grief that haunted him had only grown heavier, quieter, and more dangerous. On the surface, John Wick was a stylish revenge thriller about a hitman who loses his wife and dog. But beneath the gun-fu choreography and neon-drenched cinematography was a story that mirrored Keanu's own trauma far too closely. Wick wasn't just another action role, it was a character forged from loss, a man defined by absence, just like Keanu. Off-screen, Keanu had buried a child, carried a coffin, and endured the slow bleed of private sorrow in public silence. And, now in John Wick, he was asked to weaponize that grief into something cinematic. He didn't hesitate. But this wasn't a paycheck gig. Keanu threw himself into training with a vengeance that stunned even seasoned stunt teams. He learned judo, jiu-jitsu, and precision shooting from scratch. He spent hours every day in gun ranges, nights behind the wheel, and weeks breaking his body in fight choreography that would leave most younger actors begging for a stunt double. But Keanu refused. At nearly 50 years old, he demanded to do it, all himself. The result? A physical performance so brutal and unrelenting that it left him bruised, bloodied, and borderline broken. But more alive than he had felt in years. Because behind the choreography, Keanu was purging. He wasn't just playing a man mourning his wife. He was a man who had buried the love of his life. He wasn't just avenging a dog. He was symbolically fighting for every innocent thing life had stolen from him. That's why Wick resonated so deeply. It wasn't just action. It was pain dressed in black, grief firing back with precision. As the franchise grew, so did Keanu's mythos. But he never bragged. He never leaned into the fame. Even as John Wick Chapter 4 cemented him as one of the greatest action stars of all time, Keanu stayed the same subway-riding, fan-hugging, self-effacing soul he had always been. Because for him, every punch, every bullet, every silent stare wasn't just performance, it was therapy. He wasn't acting tough. He was surviving publicly what most of us would hide forever. And in that, John Wick became more than a movie. It became Keanu's resurrection, one shot at a time. For all the blockbusters and breathtaking stunts, the deepest wounds in Keanu Reeves's life never came from film sets. They came from love, and what it took from him. While most Hollywood actors build their personal brands on high-profile romances and flashy headlines, Keanu walked a different path, one marked by whispers, distance, and heartbreak so profound it nearly silenced him for good. His first brush with real intimacy came in the late 1980s, with actress Jill Schoelen. They were young, full of dreams, scribbling futures into the sky like children who hadn't yet learned how fragile time could be. But her extroverted energy clashed with his inward quiet, and eventually their careers and temperaments pulled them apart. Still, Keanu carried the pain long after the public forgot the pairing. Then came the quiet rumors. Dinner with Diane Keaton. Brief links to Cameron Diaz and Charlize Theron. A special bond with Winona Ryder so surreal, she once joked they were accidentally married. And then there was Sandra Bullock, his co-star, in Speed, who years later would confess she had harbored feelings for him. Keanu admitted he felt the same, but neither acted. Out of fear? Out of respect? No one knows. But that restraint created something rarer than romance, a friendship that outlasted decades of change. Yet all of those connections, real or rumored, faded beneath the one name that would define the deepest chapter of Keanu's heart: Jennifer Syme. When they met in 1998, she wasn't just another love interest. She was peace. Quiet, luminous, with a spirit that echoed his own. Soon, they were living together, dreaming of a future with children and stability. The very things Keanu had been denied since childhood. In 1999, Jennifer became pregnant, and for the first time in his life, Keanu dared to believe in permanence. He prepared for fatherhood with a tenderness that stunned even those closest to him. But fate, cold and unrelenting, had other plans. On Christmas Eve, their daughter Ava was stillborn. The nursery became a tomb of silence. Keanu was shattered, but it wasn't over. Less than 2 years later, Jennifer herself died in a car accident. One phone call, and everything he had rebuilt was erased again. At her funeral, Keanu carried her coffin on his shoulder, his head down, his eyes unreadable. Photographers captured the image, but they missed the weight. Not of the wood, but of a man once again burying the future. This wasn't just grief. It was devastation. And from that point on, Keanu would never allow love to bloom publicly again. After the loss of Jennifer Syme, Keanu Reeves didn't seek comfort in headlines, therapy couches, or teary interviews. He didn't monetize his grief. He didn't write a memoir. And he didn't chase validation. Instead, he vanished into the same quiet that had always embraced him when life grew unbearable. He chose solitude over spectacle, silence over sympathy, and in doing so, he became something almost extinct in Hollywood. A mystery not crafted by PR teams, but by pain. While other actors built empires on visibility, Keanu became a legend by stepping back. He rode the subway alone. He donated millions to children's hospitals without fanfare. He signed over Matrix back-end profits to the film's crew because he thought they deserved it more. He didn't need applause. He needed peace. And peace, for him, wasn't a destination. It was a survival strategy. He never remarried. He never flaunted another relationship. For years, he was spotted alone, on park benches, on motorcycles, at cafes with a paperback in hand. The media dubbed him Sad Keanu, projecting a narrative they could digest. But the truth was more complex. He wasn't sad. He was processing. He wasn't broken. He was choosing not to explain his pain to a world that had never earned the right to witness it. And in that quiet dignity, people saw something divine. He became a symbol not of celebrity excess, but of spiritual resilience. His face aged, his body wore the scars of stunts and surgeries, but the grace in his presence only grew. He laughed more, but never louder. He smiled more, but always with a shadow tucked just behind it. When he did speak about grief, it was never dramatic, it was honest. "Grief doesn't end," he once said. "It just changes shape." And those 6 words became a lighthouse for millions navigating their own losses. In 2019, when he gently responded to a child in the audience who asked what happens when we die, Keanu simply said, "I know that the ones who love us will miss us." It wasn't rehearsed. It was raw truth. And that's what Keanu Reeves has always offered. Not glamour, not gossip, but truth stripped of performance. At 60, he's not just a star. He's a man who lived through the unlivable and carried it without complaint. His life is not a tragedy. It's a testimony. A testimony that even in the face of repeated heartbreak, a person can choose kindness. Even in a world that takes everything, you can still give. And even when the lights go out, your silence can speak louder than words ever will.